Welcome everyone to this meeting of the City of Port Phillip Council. I declare the meeting open and I welcome the members of the public who graced our presence tonight. The City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges the Yalukit clan of the Bunwurrung. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. So our council has a local law that determines how this meeting will be conducted. There is time allotted in this tonight to public question time. There's also an opportunity for members of the public to both ask a question or make a comment on a specific item in tonight's agenda. And this will be done prior to council considering the agenda item. If you wish to ask a question or speak to a report, please complete the blue form that's available at the table just outside the chamber and hand the form to a member of staff. I encourage you to limit your questions and comments to 3 minutes and to avoid repeating any points that have already been made by other speakers. Please note that all council meetings are now being live streamed. Live streaming and recording allows the community to watch and listen in real time. Please note also, in accordance with Council's local law, that this meeting cannot be filmed or audio taped unless permission is granted by the Mayor. In the unlikely event of an emergency evacuation, please follow the instructions of the Chief Warden. So, agenda item 1, apologies. Councillors, we have no apologies as we're all here, being the diligent councils that we are. 2, minutes. Councillors, the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on the 20th of March 2019 have been circulated. Are there any questions in relation to those? If not, can I have a motion to confirm? Moved Councillor Bond, seconded Councillor Simic. I'll now put the motion. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Does anyone have a conflict of interest in a matter discussed at tonight's meeting? 4, petitions and joint letters. We have none. 5, sealing schedule. There are no documents that require sealing. 6, public question time. Councillors, we have one member of the public who've requested to ask a question tonight. And if I could ask Bill Phelan to come up and ask your question, Bill. First, could I ask you to read into the record your name and suburb, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Bill Phelan in Port Melbourne, my suburb. First of all, 2 weeks ago, at a meeting at St Kilda, I asked 3 questions. To date, I have had no response. The questions are fairly straightforward, but they were taken on notice, and there's been no response. That's not the real reason for my being here tonight. As through you, Mr Mayor, I'd like to direct the question to the CEO. As Council is presently in budget preparation mode, I'd like to know what instructions have been given to department heads about the need to reduce expenditure. And that is a broad question, and secondly and specifically, the department that is responsible for all the balloons or curb extensions, as they are commonly known, which cost this municipality a lot of money, which achieve very, very little, and ultimately, once they're created, cost money to maintain. And that area, I think, is one of huge expense to this municipality, and I'd like to know what instructions are being given to that specific department and departments in general.
Mr CEO.
Thank you. Through you, Mr Mayor. We run a very tight internal budget process starting well before Christmas, where we work through with each department their service profiles, which is their plans for services and their business plans, including priorities that they need to address that are in the council plan. We bake into the starter budget the ongoing efficiency savings, and then we get each department to present to my executive team on their budget proposals, and through that process the executive team and I identify where we believe further costings or savings can be made in addition to the baked-in efficiency dividends that we put into the budget each year. So we go through with our department's heads 3 or 4 times, starting well before Christmas and finishing in the new year before we start to formally present those proposals to council. So we have a very stringent internal process where we ask department heads to find and identify savings, and if they have not found adequate savings, then we ask them to do further work through that internal review process. In relation to the department that's responsible for curb extensions, they're like other departments, have been through that process. Sorry, I'm timing myself. At the end of the process, we put we give council a balanced budget in line with their long-term financial plan, and we have items above and below the line, and it's really up to council to determine the final budget, including the extent of efficiency savings, and they'll make those decisions before that budget's put out to draft consultation with the community in the next few months.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. I take it from the response that no instructions have been given to department heads about a need to reduce expenditure.
Sorry, Mr. Phelan, this is questions only. Sorry.
Thank you. I'm happy to answer that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Through Mr. Mayor, through that process, we give instructions to our department heads to find expenditure savings where we can, and we emphasise the need to get best value for ratepayer dollars and at the same time deliver council's agenda.
Thanks. I will now move to the presentation of reports. Councillor questions. I'm an idiot. Any councillor questions? Councillor Pearl. Quick off the mark.
Thanks, Mayor. If I could take up Mr. Phelan's first question around follow-up on questions from notice from 2 weeks ago, if officers could give an update on what the progress is on those questions and when he will be receiving a response.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, officers have been working through that response, and the resident should have a response prior to the next council meeting.
Thanks very much. Councillor Voss.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question around our portable intrusion vehicle crash barriers that we purchased a couple of years ago. They were purchased specifically for the St Kilda Festival, and they were to be used for other events in the city. I know they've been stored, and councillors were told at the time that we were going to actively try and hire them out to recoup some of the money that was originally anticipated that was originally incurred. I'm just wondering how we're going there. Where are they being stored? Have our officers been trained in their use?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I've just found out 5 minutes ago that we had these, so I'll have to take those on notice. I understand from officers that, and they're in my area obviously, I understand from officers that they may have been used for the Pride March this year, but I'm not sure if that was the case, whether there was a fee charged for that. But I'll take that on notice and get back to you.
Councillor Simic.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. My question is regarding the recent removal of park benches on Fitzroy Street. The words of the motion that saw the benches removed were that the benches would be removed temporarily. I've gone past and have seen people that used to use the benches now sitting on the ground. What process are we using to assess when the benches should be returned, and when can we expect for this to take place?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the placemaking team have been working with the community around their ideas for the area of Fitzroy Street, including the seat. We've held several creative sessions where a range of ideas were generated. with several of these ideas developed further into potential concepts, and these were presented to the last Fitzroy Street Place Planning session. At this session, a few other ideas were generated by the community, and those present at the session were asked to indicate a preference for the idea that they'd like to see pursued. The idea that had the most interest at that point in time was a concept, a tile art project, where individual ceramic tiles would be decorated by all members of the community, including the members of our community that regularly use the space. And the intent was, or is, for the tiles to tell the rich history and story of each individual, and then for these to be affixed back to the seat for reinstallation. Since the last place planning session, officers have been exploring how quickly an initiative like this could be implemented, and also the likely costs with a mosaic artist. We are, however, exploring a slight variant on the above idea. Potentially, it would be lighter, quicker and cheaper way is getting members of the community to paint and decorate the slats on the current seat and surrounds to tell their story. And we're currently seeking an artist that would be interested in participating in such a project. Once an artist has been found, we're intending to work closely with Voices of the South Side to undertake inclusive and safe engagement with members of the community who use the space often, and to really seek their commitment and involvement in such a project. And we're looking to progress that project as quickly as possible. Finally, in addition to the above, the placemaking team will soon be undertaking a walk along Fitzroy Street with a number of members of the community. And following a presentation to the Older Persons Committee this week, I understand that members of this important advisory group of council will also participate in that session. And the intent is to look at the street in its entirety and areas where it would be advantageous in the short, medium and longer term for seats to be placed along the street.
Thanks very much, Ms Bennett. And Councillor Pearl?
Thanks, Mayor. It's almost 12 months to the day in this great town hall that we passed the motion to start the process of renaming the suburbs in Fisherman's Bend. I'm just wondering what update officers can give on that process and when that process will be coming back to council.
Through you, Mr Mayor, since that motion was passed, officers have undertaken a range of tasks, including liaising heavily with the Office of Geographic Names and other providers. So there's certainly been engagement undertaken with Australia Post and Emergency Services around the proposal that Council considered in the Chamber. We've received feedback from those authorities around some of the boundaries that were proposed, and we're currently working with the Fisherman's Bend Task Force around that and trying to coordinate engagement with the community, which is a statutory requirement for the suburb naming proposal. We're currently timing our engagement with that task force. We're looking to start engagement on that process before the end of this financial year.
Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? Thanks very much, Ms Bennett. I'd now like to move to the presentation of reports. The first item is 8.1, the CEO report. Councillors, we have received one request from a member of the public to speak to this item. I now call on Robbie Nyaji to Nakwe to
Robbie Nyaji.
Robbie, could you read your name and suburb into the record, please?
Robbie Nyaji from St Kilda. Persist and we'll get there eventually, I'm sure. I'm speaking tonight in relation to the omission of the Library Action Plan from the CEO's report, and it's also not being classified as off track. At the council meeting on the 21st of March last year, amidst the kind of uproar around changes or proposed changes to Middle Park Library, council resolved to have a a forward plan on libraries in the municipality undertaken, and that plan would be in draft form presented back to council within 12 months. It's been more than 12 months now, so I guess my question is relating to why it's off track, why that hasn't been communicated to the public. My understanding is, looking back through reports, with the exception of a mention in the May CEO report of last year, no further, which was just acknowledging that the decision had been made in March last year around having a plan conducted, that no further communication has been undertaken with the community, and that further, looking at the consultant brief in relation to the draft action plan, which I believe closes this coming Monday, 8th of April, one of the parts of the motion was around the adequacy of community engagement, and it states that it should have an appropriate amount, type and timing of the engagement with the local community in relation to libraries. In the brief, it mentions that the consultant should facilitate at least 2 2-hour community consultation sessions. Given that the municipality has 5 libraries, I don't think that's potentially adequate if we're trying to make sure that we actually get into each of those 5 communities who are all obviously engaged in their libraries differently. I guess I just wanted a bit of an explanation as to why 2 was chosen rather than 5, which would in theory cover sessions at all 5 libraries. Thanks.
Mr. Keenan, please.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. My understanding when I commenced in the role was that there were 2 different dates in council plans for library action plans, and the CEO might be able to assist with that. One was because of the issues raised in relation to Middle Park Library, and I'm not sure if the CEO can actually clarify the reason for the 2 different dates.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there were 2 different dates. So the first date was in a resolution in relation to the Middle Park Library issue. That was then superseded by the Art and Soul strategy, which picked up the need for a library review. The initial date was, my understanding was for the library review to be conducted this year, as stated by the Robert N. But the Art and Soul date actually has the library review completed by the end of next financial year, and that superseded the Middle Park. There, I've timed myself out again. The Middle Park Library decision. So we went back to council, and that was clarified that the library review was actually due at the next year, not this year. So we saw clarity in relation to those 2 dates. So in terms of the tender, I'll let Mr. Keenan finish the rest of the question.
So there are 2 quite separate issues. One is the issue of being a tender to a consultant to undertake a role, and the second is the issue of consultation on the development of the library action plan. So the tender brief, that's what we require the consultant to do. That's not the extent of the consultation that will occur by council during the development of the library action plan. So there will be the usual, there hasn't been a consultation strategy developed yet, but it will involve the usual council mechanisms such as using Have Your Say, undertaking and receiving submissions from groups. That is simply the consultant brief, which will limit in terms of cost. We've got a certain cost envelope for the consultancy. Consultations were something we're able to do quite effectively ourselves, and we don't need to be paying a lot of money for a consultant to do that. We want to use their expertise in developing other aspects of the review. So the actual consultation hasn't been determined. That's the consultation that we require the consultant who's tendering for the job to undertake.
Councillors, any questions? Councillor Pearl?
This item is not in the project delivery, but I'm just wondering if you could give an update on the security upgrade to Bub-Up Womanjika Family Care after the incident more than 2 months ago, where a security review recommended the installation of some security cameras in the front and foyer area of the childcare centre.
Good on you, Mr. Keenan.
My understanding, through you, Mr. Mayor, my understanding is that that's on track, and I've not received any reports that the project's offline, so it's underway as far as I'm aware.
So just to follow up, when you say it's on track, when will the works be completed?
I'd have to take that on notice through you, Mr. Mayor, to get the exact dates, but it's soon as far as I...
Councillor Pearl?
Just another one quickly. Just wondering on the map for St Kilda Road Precinct. Sorry, I don't have it up in front of me, but I know what it says. The past 3 or 4 issuances have just had the council assisting Melbourne Metro, and I know we're playing a role in that, but it's a fairly small role in compared to what we can actually do in terms of our own service delivery. So I'm just wondering in the future perhaps if we could provide more flavour about what council is actually doing in addition to that project for the St Kilda Road Precinct also, if possible.
Through you, Mr Mayor, yes, that's certainly possible.
Thanks, Ms Bennett. Any further questions? Do we have a resolution? Move Councillor Simic, seconded Councillor Voss. Councillor Simic, do you wish to speak? I'm actually going to speak. And then I never quite know how to handle what we should do about the CEO's report. It's voluminous, it's extensive, it covers all sorts of activities of the council. But I thought I should just isolate and highlight a few things because this has been a very active time. Frankly, there are several things that make my ample breast fill with pride, and this is one of them, because it just tells the world how much we do. So I don't quite know how to talk about it, but I'm going to do it in this way. There's sort of 3 sections to the report. There's an introduction, and then the second section talks about those transformative changes that are so important to the council that they were elevated to a particular status, and that includes Fisherman's Bend, water, waste management and transport and parking. So I just thought I'd highlight some of the issues from those first 2 sections. The second section is, as I say, detailed, voluminous, and with a lot of detail for those who are Port Phillip tragics to read and get enthused about, I hope, about what this council and particularly its officers does and achieves. So in the introductory section about what happened in the recent times, there's so much there to be pleased and proud of. Cultural Diversity Week, a social worker from the council, Kate Inserti, was named the Social Worker of the Year, a much-deserved accolade, which really gives a lot of credibility and honour to our work with the homeless. And then there was the recycling crisis. So every so often, council conducts its business, and then factors outside the council impact upon us. It's good that some of the officers who helped manage this time when our recycling was being refused admission to the MRF, or Materials Recycling Facility, that we have contracted with because the EPA had closed it down for fear of risk of fire. And I just thought we handled that really well. The officers were at the forefront of dealing with this issue, and they dealt with it with such aplomb and expertise that we were honoured with the visit of a Dep Secretary from the Victorian Government, which is not a common thing. So I thought that introduction showed just how we were ambushed by outsiders and then reacted. Fisherman's Bend is in the transformative areas. Fisherman's Bend continued with extraordinary amount of work being done on this very interesting and challenging project in waste management. As I said, we dealt with the waste management crisis, and it was limited to 2 weeks and 2 days. I have to confess that I made a statement in diversity that has caused me embarrassment, because I said that our recycling was kosher and was taking everything. No sooner did I write that than outside forces made me a liar, and I apologise for misleading people. But what I do say is that I do commit to complete and honest disclosure of every time we do fail to recycle. So if forces beyond our control impinge on our recycling, then we will be honest. Brutally honest, I hope. But also, we're also conducting a review of street and beat cleansing, hard waste collection and dump waste collection. This review is so important to us because people are really concerned about how we do these activities. So that was great to read in the CEO's report, and there's a lot coming up, including finalising a trial use of recycled plastics as road base in Mozart Streets in Kilda. So that's something to look forward to. Water management, it's just amazing to see that we're now managing our water because we've got tanks that take 1 million litres, 500 megalitre tanks. So exciting that we're embarking on this particular journey to be responsible users and collectors of water. So if you weren't proud of the City of Port Phillip before, please be proud of it now. And that is a great project and will really enhance our record in responsible management of water and the provision of water to parks. And transport and parking, I won't go over it, but we're now rolling out the interesting part of our transport plan. So we've done, for example, intercept surveys around South Melbourne to complete the South Melbourne traffic study. We've completed the Fisherman's Bend parking occupancy survey. We've installed 16 new on-street car share bays, and we continue to liaise with the Victorian Government to progress the delivery of commitments, including the St Kilda Road, Central Bike Lanes, the Shrine to the Sea Corridor, Park Street Link. I mean, we've been talking about the Park Street Link for a decade and a half, and it's happening. So I just wanted to thank and congratulate the CEO and all his officers for yet another report that's incredibly exciting and makes me proud to be part of this organisation. Thanks. Councillor Crawford.
I just wanted to point out one thing that's in the CEO's report, put it on the public record for anyone listening at home, that World Social Work Day occurred last Tuesday, and at I think it was a breakfast they had, our very own Kate Incherti, who's worked at council for a darn long time, doing great work in the homeless sector and working with the vulnerable people in our area, was named Victoria's Social Worker of the Year, and I think that's really high praise for the kind of level and the kind of quality of work she does in our community, and we are very, very grateful to have her on board.
Yes, thanks very much. Any further speakers? Do you wish to close, Councillor Simic? Can I move to the vote now? All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. Thanks very much. Now move to the next agenda item. The acceptance of the City of Port Phillip Older Persons Consultative Committee Annual Report 2018. We have one speaker on this matter, which is who is Georgina Solides, who's the chair of the OPCC. Georgie, do you want to come and read your name into the record and your suburb, which I know as Elwood?
Georgina Solides from Elwood. Thanks for the invitation. I'd like to just acknowledge my thanks for the opportunity to present our report for 2018. And I'd also like to put on record our appreciation of the support of the Council more generally, particularly through the work that Laura Catapan and Sheridan Green do for us. Incredibly professional and ongoing support. I'd also like to acknowledge Mary McCorry, who's often at our meetings and keeps us well informed and is incredibly supportive. And just as a little sidestep, I recently attended a meeting where 40-odd people with equivalent responsibilities in other councils, and our council seems to be well ahead of the pack. So I'd like to note that as an appreciation from our committee. I also want to acknowledge my colleagues on the committee. For those of you who aren't familiar, there's 12 people on the committee, different backgrounds, different ages, places of residence and interest, but all of us share a commitment to contributing to our community and sharing our expertise and experience. The committee was established in 2000, and putting up for consideration the fact that next year will be a special year for the committee, and some of our founding members are still there with us, so we're foreshadowing request for council support to celebrate that. How do we work? Generally, we have a planning meeting in January where we frame priorities, and these are done obviously in relation to the framework that Port Phillip Council policies, but also our own terms of reference. But we also engage with policies from the Health Organisation, the World Health Organisation, particularly around age-friendly cities. We have monthly meetings, and we also work through a number of working groups. Our priorities for last year, and obviously these are all listed in the report, I'll just skim through them, but they're listed on page 3. A keen one for us is advice and advocacy, communication and information, diversity, network partnerships, sustainability and climate change, and the physical environment. We also prioritise our links with other organisations and groups, and we have a number of these that we're quite proud of through the Multi-Faith Network of Port Phillip, Linking Neighbours, the Community Forum, the Port Phillip Community Forum, the Council of the Ageing, U3A, the Australian Association of Gerontology, the Lions Club, the Elwood Croquet Club, Casper Care, MAV Positive Ageing Network, and the Victorian Active Ageing Partnership Project. So we're trying to keep ourselves informed but close to the pulse of relevant issues. We're fairly keen on outreach to the extent that we can keep that going, and we've held an annual forum. Last year's was on planning for future care. I think it was a great success. We supported minority communities by providing information in Polish and Russian, and the Greek community held its own forum as part of it with speakers from their own organisations, exceedingly well attended. The Seniors Festival, I'm sure most of you have heard of that. It goes from strength to strength. We had over 60 events last year, over 4,000 attendees, and the Port Phillip Council hosted 12 of these events, as well as sponsoring 30 local groups to initiate their own events. Linking Neighbours is something else that that we're quite proud of, and this brings together people for anything from early morning coffee groups right through to excursions for people who I think otherwise would be fairly housebound. Consultation is the big one for us, obviously, and that's within our terms of reference. And on page 5 of the report, there's some detailed explanation of the consultations that we undertook or participated in last year. But just to list them for the record here: demographics update, food services, ageism training, Fisherman's Bend framework, the creative and prosperous cities, sustainable environment, footpath repair, heritage campaign, the aged care reform, Connect Live strategy, waste management, reference committee review for the council, housing and homelessness assist, aged care and community safety, and the Move, Connect and Live strategy. And I think what we're really keen to continue is our capacity to input into strategy and policy making within Port Phillip. And in that context, I'd really also like to commend the officers who've come to our meetings, and they've been able to give us enough information for us to then provide advice. So they've come willing to listen rather than just speak at us. The Heritage Campaign was just one example of that sticks in my mind, where they began with what was valuable to us. That was the starting point of the consultation, rather than present us with the strategy, which we then had an opportunity to comment on. And I think that model is pervading more and more of the consultations that we're involved in. The other thing I'd like to finish on is our role in advocacy, and we take that very, very seriously. And we're actually enjoying the fact that we can bottom up as well as top down. So we're not just becoming a responsive committee, but one that's proactive. And we do that primarily through a round table section of our agenda. And a number of the things that we accomplished last year, I think, started off as a simple comment from somebody, the footpath needs fixing, but that's developed into something further. So that's something we want to continue into the future. So I'll leave it there and take comments or questions, I think, if the Chair allows that.
Could you please stay there, Councillor Pearl?
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for your report. It was interesting reading. One thing I'm interested to get your view on, particularly under objective number 1, advice, is what role do you think council should be playing in terms of decision-making around finances and financial literacy of older persons in our community? Obviously, the lifestyle of older people in our community and their security is, in some cases, determined by their decision-making around their financial arrangements, and that has a huge impact on the rest of their life. And also, a number of these people are very vulnerable to scamming, which is much, much easier now than it has been in past decades. I didn't read anything of that in the report. I'm interested to see what role do you think council can play in financial advice models potentially to older persons, and what role we can play in terms of stopping financial devastation through scamming.
It has come up in our discussions through elder abuse, and it was one of the things we were considering as a topic for a future forum. So I think that would be one way of getting into the sorts of issues that you're discussing. But I think more specifically, I'd say information that's multilingual and perhaps hosting a forum. If there's any capacity to do some basic research around discussing with groups that are already, like the linking neighbour groups, about what people's experiences are as a starting off point and what they perceive their needs are and the element of support that they think is best suited.
Can I augment that by saying we did have the seminar on elder abuse by relatives that was opened by Councillor Bernadine Voss. Packed out. The chamber was packed out. You could have heard a pin drop. And multilingual was great and necessary, and the start of more information provision on that issue. Any other questions? Thanks very much, Mr. Zalidis. And councillors, any other questions of the officers? Do we have a resolution? Councillor Copsey and Councillor Baxter. Councillor Copsey, could you please speak to us?
I'm happy to move receipt of this report. It was really fantastic reading, and I thank the officers and the members of the OPCC who have put so much work into developing this. It's fantastic and a really high bar in terms of reporting back to Council on the committee's activities, so thank you very much. It was much appreciated. I'm going to leave it to some other councillors who I know have had direct involvement and representation on the committee during this term to go into some more discussion. But I will just say I really appreciate the OPCC's input particularly into our community engagement processes. We all know that accessibility in particular, as we're looking at our Move, Connect, Live strategy, is absolutely key. And when you design cities for accessibility for children, for the aged, and for people with limited mobility, then they're more accessible and healthy for everybody. So it's a very, very useful input to our processes and decision making, and I'm always very glad to receive the input of the OPCC. Thank you very much for all your hard work.
Councillor Baxter?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I would also like to echo the thanks for all the good work that you do, and also just want to acknowledge the OPCC's representation on the multi-faith network has always been really constructive through Coralie, and I really enjoy seeing everything I come out of the OPCC, because it's usually very well considered and has a deep impact on what our community looks like, what our city looks like. And it's clear that there's a really great relationship between that committee and the officers as well, who have been doing a really great job. So you know who you are. I'm also happy to second this.
Any other speakers, councillors? I serve on this committee, and I have to say it's incredibly high functioning. The place is littered with really brainy people, and you might have noticed a small trickle, which I think will come to be more of a flood of members of the OPCC coming to make submissions to Council on various matters, which I really welcome, and it's good for the OPCC, and I suggest good for us. Councillor Copsey? Councillor Voss? Councillor Copsey, do you wish to close?
No, thank you.
I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Ms. Zalidis. Okay. Let's move on to 11.1, outline Metropolitan Waste and Resource Recovery Group collective procurement of residual waste disposal services for metropolitan councils. Councillors, we don't have anyone from the community, sadly, talking about waste, but do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Copsey.
Yes, the report speaks about continuous improvement measures that we're going to be seeking in the contract, and I was wondering if officers could give an outline of the type of continuous improvement measures we'll be seeing and how these might assist Council to achieve some of its objectives under Don't Waste It, our waste plan.
Mr Bednarczyk?
Through you, Mayor. The contract's it's a collaborative contract that will be working with a range of other councils. So in terms of there'll certainly be economies of scale in the waste industry for opportunities for continuous improvement. Some of the ways that the potential ways that landfills would be able to deal with the product may result in local improvements to landfill management. It may result in additional resources extracted through the introduction of technologies that may be organics and other precious materials that are currently in our residential waste stream are some of the ways. The structure of the contract will encourage the market to provide opportunities and examples of technologies that can be applied into the waste sector. That's the way we're sort of envisaging it to occur.
Any further questions? Any resolutions? Oh, sorry, Councillor Copsey.
It's obviously a hot topic and a topic of concern for our community and for councillors. It's been top of mind recently. Will councillors have a further opportunity, once there's indication from the sector around the group procurement, to feed into any of the particular contract terms and advocate for our priorities in that process? And when will that happen?
Through you, Mr Mayor.
Mr Vella.
So basically, talks already underway with the Metropolitan Waste Group of our priorities now, waste strategy.
Sorry, Mr Vella, could you get a little bit closer to the microphone? It's very directional.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Currently, we're already having talks with the Metropolitan Waste Management regarding our waste strategy targets. So that's being taken into account straight away. We'll be providing a briefing update as part of the process to Council.
Thanks, Mr Vella. Councillors, if there are no further questions, can we have a resolution, please? Moved Councillor Crawford and seconded Councillor Pearl. You're okay? You're happy to let it slide through to the keeper? Councillor Pearl? Any other speakers? We'll start with Councillor Voss and then Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. So I'm obviously supporting this motion, but I did want to say that looking at attachment 1, the waste service contract summary, we've got a number of other contracts out there, and I'll be looking to have as detailed discussions and papers to us prior to any of the contracts going out for, say, curbside residential garbage collection and recycling collection and hardened dump waste collection going forward, so we get a much better opportunity with as long a lead time as possible to input into the sort of service standards that we're after in future contracts.
Thanks very much, Councillor Voss. Councillor Copsey.
Thank you. Thanks to the officers for your continued hard work in what's a pretty rapidly evolving space at the moment. I hope that we'll see some really positive developments across the state that will help to deal with some of the local issues that City of Port Phillip, and not City of Port Phillip alone, many local governments have been dealing with the failure of our recycling systems in Victoria recently. I just wanted to highlight for those who are interested in this topic that we are seeking at the moment to enter into a relatively short-term contract for disposal to landfill of general waste stream and residuals. Some of the things that I'm happy to see in the initial sounding here is that we're looking for flexibility to transition to better waste management opportunities if those become available, and also that we are seeking, as part of this negotiation process, not to have a required amount of garbage to be delivered to any particular contractor, so that if we get the opportunity to reduce municipal waste and the valuable resources in particular that are in our municipal waste stream, then we can do that at some point during the contract without facing penalties. Very best of luck with securing outcomes aligned with our waste strategy through this procurement process. Thanks.
Great. Councillor Crawford, do you wish to close? I'll now move to the vote. All those in favour? Declare that carried unanimously. Thanks very much, councillors. Thank you, officers. We now move to agenda item 12.1, the St Kilda Marina interim lease. We have two speakers on this matter. Could I ask Peter Holland? Hi, you know the drill. Name and suburb.
Peter Holland, St Kilda. Look, I'm sorry that I'm the village idiot. I know that in my years in community politics, I've annoyed many a councillor and many a council officer, starting way back in '85 when I saved the penguin colony from the St Kilda Council's plans for the St Kilda Harbour. And I'm very aware of the academic research on regulatory capture, which when applied to councils means the situation where the officers dominate the council and the councillors just rubber stamp the officers' decisions. Now, there's two important bulwarks against this situation. One is to have strong-minded councillors, and the other is to have active residents and ratepayers like Brenda Forbath or Kay O'Connor, etc. Now, at times we gadflies might be annoying, but we do provide a different perspective, hopefully to help councillors in their decision-making. So tonight you have to decide on the interim lease for the St Kilda Marina, and I'm very confident that eventually we'll get a great marina. We've got a big proposal from the Spooners. We know there's a proposal from Australia Marina Developments. There may be others, hopefully with a bridge over the marina mouth to create a great coastal path. But unfortunately, we're off track. I've been told by former councillors that 5 years ago they were assured by officers that things were on track for a new start to the marina next month. Now we're being asked to approve a 3-year delay. I submit that council should not accept the proposed interim lease. There are a variety of reasons. The officers have negotiated outside their mandate, which was for a short-term lease at market rent. It doesn't comply with the Crown Land Reserves Act. The rent is too low. There'll be no improvements in the term of the lease. But most importantly, the term is too long. 3 long years we have to wait for a start on the new marina. We know that the officers wanted 2 years. The advice I've received is that we can process the required documentation within 12 months. So I submit that there is an alternative, and that is that council should offer the Spooners not a straight 3-year lease, but a 3-year lease on the basis of 1 year by 1 year by 1 year at council's option, and give the officers the responsibility and the resources to process the long-term lease as soon as possible, hopefully within 12 months, maybe within 24 months. The threat to the Spooners would be if they reject the interim lease on a 1 year by 1 year by 1 year basis, then there'll be a competitive tender for an interim lease thrown open to all contenders, including them. Now, I'm confident that the Spooners would accept a 1 year by 1 year by 1 year lease. They'll realise that they haven't got the council over a barrel. There is a very credible rival operator willing and able to take over an interim lease. They'll realise there is widespread community concern about the length of a 3-year lease. They will know that they'll make substantial profits over the 12 months or 24 months. They'll continue to receive the rivers of gold that they're getting at the moment from the subleases. And the Spooners will want to keep council's goodwill because they'll want to maximise their chances of winning the long-term lease. So I suggest that council should not offer the Spooners a 3-year lease, but rather a 1 year by 1 year by 1 year lease. Let me conclude by quoting Socrates. At his trial, Socrates said that all societies need a gadfly to sting the steed of state into fulfilling its proper duties. Well, this gadfly says that council should not approve the proposed 3-year lease. This gadfly says that the council should offer a 3-year lease on a flexible basis at council's option, 1 year by 1 year by 1 year, or at the worst, a 2-year lease. So hopefully this gadfly won't have to drink hemlock. Hopefully this gadfly will have made a positive contribution to getting a great new marina happening as soon as possible. Hopefully within 12 months, possibly within 24 months, but not 3 long years, surely.
Thanks very much, Peter. And yes, I don't wish you the hemlock option. Robbie Nyagui? It only took
Close
8 times.
Close but no cigar, Mr Mayor. Robbie Nyagui from St Kilda. I'm speaking on behalf of the Community Alliance of Port Phillip tonight. Most of the other CAP members are at the Climate Change Forum at St Kilda Town Hall, and I was the one that drew the short straw, unfortunately. CAP's really excited about the marina. We were obviously excited when we came and spoke at a number of other council meetings, and we still remain excited despite the kind of continued progress with this particular interim lease. And we are confident, obviously, that the long-term outcome will be good, That said, we have kind of got two kind of major areas of concern. One is around the lease itself and one is around the process. In terms of the lease itself, as we said 2 weeks ago, we still feel that this rent is far too low, that purchasing of the assets for $620,000, regardless of whether the incoming operator wants them, is disappointing and not necessarily in the interests of the broader community. We're disappointed to see that there won't be any interim upgrades around things like the removal of a lot of the unnecessary fencing across the site. And we're upset, obviously, about the time. 3 years is certainly a long delay in getting a long-term lease. On the other sort of flip side, we're also concerned about the process. I think we're broadly sort of satisfied with the Council's response to our questions around the compliance with the Act. But I guess we kind of wondering what the point of all the consultation and submission was, and I guess our question really is, after receiving our submission 2 weeks ago and responding to it tonight, was there any further consultation and negotiation with Australian Marinas, and were all the points that we as a community put to them? Because it kind of feels disappointing to feel as if we sort of see this response to submissions and it just feels like Council sort of read them and then dismissed them, and that there hasn't actually been any progress made to kind of get a little bit closer to what the community necessarily wanted as the outcome for the short-term lease. And the other thing, I guess, is actually the response to our submission. One of the key things that we submitted to Council, which for whatever reason hasn't been included in these responses to submission, was around the $620,000 asset purchase. There's a small mention on page 3 about the sort of restating Council's position that the wet berths have a 13-year life expectancy. But I guess our real question was, if the incoming leasee doesn't want these $620,000 worth of assets, why on earth is our Council buying them if they could potentially just end up being tossed out? And it's really around their going use to the marina plans moving forward. We're not questioning whether they would continue to float and sit in the marina. That's not the question here. It's around, if that incoming leasee doesn't want them, why on earth are we as a Council making a commitment 3 years in advance to purchase them? I think that's a key component of the long-term tendering. So it's kind of disappointing to feel as if we're bound to that decision regardless of whether the incoming leasee wants them, and it's equally disappointing to see that that isn't included in the response to submissions. Thank you, Councillors.
Thanks very much, Robbie. Councillors, questions? I might head off the batting and repeat Mr Niagui's question to you, the officers, about the purchase of the wet berths.
Thank you, Mayor. The purchase of the wet berths, which the arrangement is that if the tenant under the proposed short-term lease does leave the site at the end of that proposed term, would sell the assets to Council. The reason why we think this is a good idea is to avoid the situation we're currently in, which is that key infrastructure is not owned by Council, and we have no way to retain it if the current tenant were to leave. It secures the continuity of the site through any transition into a new lease.
Through you, Mr Mayor, if I can add to that as well. In our negotiations, the Marinas or the Spooners informed us that they had a buyer, and that if Council did not go ahead with the lease as proposed, that they would be selling those assets immediately at the end of the current lease, which would have, and so it was a condition of the negotiation that we would buy those assets and they would not sell them.
Councillor Crawford.
I note that the community is asking many of the questions that councillors have asked of you in briefings. So this is, it's please be assured, community, we have taken these up. But could you clarify, in the negotiations, we took some of from the submission sections, did we ask the possible lessees if they would consider some of those factors, negotiating good faith with subtenants and things like that?
Through you, Mayor, we did go back to the Spooners and engage with them on some of the topics that had been raised, and in particular the ability to negotiate further if that was required, and how they were managing their subtenants. And the feedback was that they wouldn't be open to any further negotiation, and that they had negotiated in good faith the agreement that was on the table. They did communicate about the intention to continue the agreements roughly in line with what is already in place with their subtenants, but that there would be a market review.
Councillor Crawford.
Can I clarify the time frame with all the experts that we've engaged over the process? They sort of is it about 2 years as a minimum before we could get to the point? Because the eyes are on the prize. So what's the reality of getting things done? Like, is 2 years the minimum or unlikely?
Through you, Mayor, the project timeline that's been approved by Council states June 2020 as executing the lease. That timeline is already under pressure, and we've engaged a commercial advisor to detail the procurement timeline and the key steps that are required, and we think that we will need every bit of that time, and going on past experiences, particularly with the Palais, we required significant amount of time to undertake the expression of interest process, the review and shortlist, then an RFP, request for proposals process with the shortlisted, and then a best and final offer process, navigating the final details of the lease. That all takes significant time.
Councillor Crawford. I'll go to Councillor Copsey until it returns.
Similarly, around timelines, I know that we're speaking tonight about the interim lease, but noting the community questions about the engagement that's been done to date on the marina, and where that process sits in relation to the interim lease, and also any impacts that officers might be aware of with the interim leasing process to change on the longer term project.
Through you, Mayor, the interim lease is really a pivotal component to the long-term leasing process, and it provides a bridge between what's in place now and the future state. And the plan that we have in place is to focus the attention and energy into the future state, including all of the engagement that has gone into the development of the vision and objectives, and also the site brief, which is in development at the moment. The community panel provided significant involvement in that and input into that, into the key elements of that, and that is on track to come to council in June for approval, or earlier, I think. In May for the site brief adoption, which is a key element of the long-term procurement process. We're also in development of the procurement plan, which is another key document. So all of the elements fit together, and the community engagement has really provided the input as the basis for the long-term vision for the site, with the focus being on maintaining operations in the short term and minimising the impact to everybody involved while significant change is forecast for the future.
Councillor Crawford?
If I can add to
that,
sorry, Mr. Mayor. I think the question was also around what would be the impact of any change in the current approach to the interim lease. There's a number of considerations there. One would be if we were to renegotiate or seek to try and renegotiate key terms with the Spooners, who have said they're not open to that, but if we tried to do that, those key terms, by nature of the processes that we have to undertake, would have to come back to council again through a public consultation process, which would add months to that interim leasing process. We would be able to make some progress on the long-term lease, but going out to market during that with the uncertainty, we would not be able to do. So they would start to put additional pressure on the timelines. which would then bite into potentially a council election and decision-making timetables where the council will go into a period of being unable to make decisions, which would then put into question whether we should delay the process until a new council is appointed that can guide it through from start to finish. If we were to abandon the process and try to run seek to get another tenant in place in the short term, that process would take approximately 6 months. We would not be able to go ahead with the long-term lease during that period because there'd be significant disruption to the market and the potential competitors or players who will be playing in that long-term leasing process. We'd have to seriously consider whether we would undertake that process at all, because there would be a period of time where the marina would need to shut.
Councillor Crawford?
So that's what my question was. Are we able to actually have two EOIs out at the same time for a short-term lease and a long-term lease? So that would not be possible. It would push the long-term lease, which is the big goal, back significantly if we were to not pass this lease tonight, I mean.
Through you, Mayor, yes, there would be at least a 3-month delay while we undertook another advertising process. But if we were to undertake a full tender process for a new short-term lease open to the market, which we would advise if council were to not take up the current offer on the table, it would be a 6-month process, and we could not undertake both the long-term and the short-term process at the same time. It would be way too confusing for the market, and it would lead to probably substandard long-term submissions for that.
Okay, if there are no further questions, does anyone have a motion to move? Councillor Bond is moving. I'll second. Okay, Councillor Bond.
It's been mentioned a couple of times tonight that some in the community think we could have got a better outcome, we have been told by officers that this is the best outcome they have been able to negotiate with the existing leaseholder and ensure continuous operation of the marina. To Mr Holland, I can assure you that an alternative to the current position was very vigorously pursued, and an argument in favour or an argument against this current position was very vigorously put forward. Ultimately, council has decided to go with this current process, and that's the decision of council, and we accept that as a group. The big prize here is the 50-year or whatever year lease for the marina, the long-term lease, whatever length of term that happens to be. And we're told that we need the full 3 years till that will be ready to take over. Yes, we would love to have gotten more money for this interim lease. That's not going to be the case, but we need to put this short-term lease behind us and focus on the long-term lease. That is where we will get the best outcome for the city if we put all our energies into that instead of stopping that process, coming back, putting a whole heap of money and resources into a short-term lease, and then recommencing the long-term lease and delaying it even further than it has been delayed at present. So, we'll be supporting this lease here tonight, and I look forward to participating in the long-term lease process. I know we're going to get a great result. We've already got 2 groups that have indicated they are going to put forward proposals for the marina. Hopefully we get many, many more, and we get from that long-term lease process a very good outcome for the city of Port Phillip. So I will be supporting this lease here tonight.
Thanks, Councillor Bond. Councillors, I'm the seconder. Any council that I'm associated with, I would hope, would be risk-averse on major issues. And the big prize is the 50-year lease, as Councillor Bond has said, or whatever term it may be. So that is the big prize. And to put out the beauty pageant for that big prize, we have to have a marina that is in operation, managed with a degree of settled continuity, and make sure that the person who is managing it presents the marina as a viable operating asset. So that's a really important aspect of my approach to the disposition of big assets. Continuity, risk aversion, and that's why I share everyone, including the community's disappointment with some of the terms. I clearly want them to be better, but in a market you get what you can get, and this is what we've got. And I don't do anything other than congratulate the officers for conducting this negotiation with a robust approach to try and advance the interests of the city. So that was my overarching approach. The second question is the 3 years that Mr. Holland raised. And the 3 years is actually probably about how long it will take the ultimate winner of the long-term lease. It'll take them years to get approvals and plans and consultation with the community up and running. These things are slow and protracted, so I'm not so upset about the 3 years in the lease. Clearly I'd prefer it to be one by one, but it didn't happen that way, and I don't think it's too much of a problem. And finally, I'd just like to say that speed is of the essence. The irony is that if we were to go to tender for the short-term lease, it could add another several years, because we might be too late for the main lease to be tendered at the end of the political cycle. There might be another year or so briefing new councillors and getting the whole thing started again. It would render the consultation that we've already conducted with our community panel irrelevant, and would have to be repeated, ignored, or replicated. So there are incredible costs to not getting on with it. And the only way to get on with it is to pass the officer's recommendation that we have before us tonight. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Brand.
I was intending to say pretty much the same things that have been said, so I'll just make a few points in the summary. I think it's important because we all do have, or many of us have, constituents that are concerned about this, and I think it's important that we get the opportunity to put our thinking on the record. And my thinking is very similar to what's been said. It is, there's of course boundless opportunities for getting different results from a different negotiation, but that comes with boundless complexities. All sorts of things would be different, all sorts of terms would be on the table, all sorts of things could go wrong, all sorts of risks, untold risks associated with it. We need to go back and look at what the fundamental purpose of the interim lease is, which is a smooth transition without interruption to operations at the marina, to the big long-term lease. And we could have easily have won, we could have, not easily, but we could possibly have gained more money out of it, but this is not a money-making, this interim lease is not a money-making operation. It would have been nice if it made more money, but that's not its purpose. It's not its primary purpose, its fundamental purpose. It's the same with time. It would be nice if we could speed it up, but that is not its purpose. We have the time that we need is the time that it'll take to do, not just negotiate the lease, but we have not actually got the brief organised yet for that, and that is a process which we've taken a lot of care with, and we do not want to mess it up by making a rushed decision on that. If there are issues that need to be ironed out, we need that time. And it is also the time after the lease is awarded through that long process is then for the winner of the lease, of the new long-term lease, to actually design and develop in detail their project to the point that they can actually then get straight on with it. There's a lot of time, there's a lot of stuff that needs to go in, and the discussions I've had with other people who are more in the know about marinas than I am is that 3 years seems quite a reasonable amount of time actually to expect before they would actually start works. The new lessees would actually start work, which is when we want the new lease to start. So what we could gain out of money, how we could speed things up possibly, how we could win short-term improvements, they are all absolutely minor compared to what we will win with a good long-term lease in this, and I am very content to go with a lease which is a low-risk lease that keeps it simple, keeps it focused, keeps it secure and discreet and direct, and I'm very happy to go with what we have before us.
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Brand. I think you did add value. I don't think you repeated a lot, and sometimes it matters not what you say but who you are and when you say it, so it's good. Councillor Voss, do you wish to speak? Okay. Councillor Simic?
I just want to reassure the community and anyone watching at home that we did prosecute the same sort of arguments that have been raised from you. And this has been a very long and thorough process, and I wanted to add my thanks to the officers who have been on the receiving end of some criticism around this for the work that they've done, because they've done so in consultation with councillors and under very difficult circumstances. Negotiations are tough, and anyone who's been involved in a negotiation knows that you don't get always what you want. But I think we have an outcome which, I agree we should have, council should have perhaps done this work some years ago, but it's not the situation that we're in currently. But the work that has been done to rectify that has been exemplary. I won't repeat what other councillors have said, but to add my support to those comments and encourage us as a community to move forward from this point and to be very focused on the long-term lease and the future outcomes of the site, which we can work together on, making sure that they're the best that they can possibly be.
I'm just going to add my voice. It's not exactly the outcome we would have wished for, but it does put us in a reasonable place to get the big lease right. I might also want to acknowledge our officers who actually had to do the hard work of negotiation. So it's all good and well for us to say, get this outcome, get that outcome, but to actually deal with, obviously, some tough negotiators, hats off to you guys. Thank you for your hard work.
Hear, hear. Councillor Bond, do you wish to close?
Only to say how pleased I was to hear that a certain former councillor actually read his councillor notes on the St Kilda Marina a few years back. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. Thanks very much, everyone. 14.1, Proposed Tenancy Agreements, Gasworks Arts Park. Councillors, there's no members of the public who wish to speak to this item. Are there any questions? Councillor Voss.
Yes, I've got a couple of questions about the lease and licence. First of all, can I clarify that this is looking at every single building on that site, except for perhaps the multi-net one and the Southport nursing home?
Through you, Mayor, that's correct. It is dealing with all of the buildings, apart from those that you mentioned, that are both on the Crown land and Council's freehold.
Thank you. And can I clarify that there's actually 2 leases and 2 licences that we're looking at going out to statutory consultation? Consultation?
Through you, Mayor, the 2 leases are going out to consultation, and the leases are split up into Crown land and Council-owned freehold. The licences are not going out to statutory process.
Sorry, Mayor, can I keep asking a couple of questions?
Go for it.
Can you explain why the licences don't need to go out to statutory consultation?
Through you, Mayor, there's a requirement that needs to be met for leases or licences to go out to statutory consultation. Of course, there can be a decision to take anything out through that process, but the trigger is the length of lease, which is over a year, and also the value of the lease being or licence being over 10,000 or 50,000. Pardon me.
Thank you. Now we have some environmental requirements in the terms. Can you outline what they might be?
Through you, Mayor, I haven't got the specific details in front of me. It's not contained in the report, but we're largely keeping the terms of these leases the same as they have been, with the understanding that a significant review will be undertaken as part of the development of a new property policy and the review of the funding agreement. So this lease is really an outcome of the funding agreement that's in place, and so a review of the whole agreement will be undertaken, and that will include a review of the sustainability environmental measures.
Thank you, Ms McNeil. I do note there's some in there under number 9, and which I'm very supportive of. One of the key pieces of key interests areas I have for these particular buildings, in particular like the arts and craft workshop and the sculpture workshop, etc., is that they're actually become more utilised. For example, all of our buildings, we have an obligation to our community to make sure that they're more multi-purpose and there's much more use. They're not just a single use going forward. I'm wondering where would be the best place to have a requirement that they do have these sorts of features in it. Would it be in the funding deed, or would it be in the lease or the rental agreements?
Through you, Mayor, the opportunity for increasing utilisation is across the whole portfolio, I think. I think there's a lot of room for increased utilisation of all of our community facilities. In particular with these, I think the operating model around all of the different buildings will need to be assessed as part of the review of the funding deed and the lease moving forward. So how are all of the buildings operating together to deliver the service that Council envisages, and what is the opportunity to add value by changing the way some of those buildings are used? And I think it's a combination of the funding deed and the lease working together that would achieve that.
So, Ms McNeil,
Go for it.
how can we make that happen, because the funding deed's not up at the moment? Do we have to wait till then, or is that something we can include now, or how would you suggest that we make those buildings work harder?
Through you, Mayor, the way that these leases are proposed is that they are basically maintaining the business as usual, with the understanding that future change may come down the line. We can certainly change the approach and can look at what else we can insert, but that would require us to go back and look at what can we do under what we've currently proposed versus starting the process again.
Through you, Mr Mayor, just to add to Ms McNeil's response, we can certainly have a conversation with Gasworks, and my understanding is they'll be open to having conversations with us about how we might improve the utilisation of the facilities in the short term. So I think we can take that up outside of the lease. This is a short-term lease. It is meant to continue with the existing arrangements, but we can certainly have that conversation. I believe they're open to it.
Councillor Crawford?
I guess as part of that conversation, though, could I ask that we consider that arts facilities do work quite differently to normal multi-purpose spaces, so that it has to be cut. It can't necessarily be the same as every other multi-purpose space.
Through you, Mayor, yes, we can certainly take that on board, and I think would be working with the service managers who lead this area.
Can I just ask a question, or may I just ask a question? Have I got it right when I have, with my arithmetic, that the subsidy to the artists is in the vicinity of $650,000, which is an eye-watering amount of money? And would it be open to Gasworks Park to take it at the current lease and then perhaps charge more to various artists who may be established or whatever? Could they charge more than the face value that so they'd be a sub-lessee or a sub-licensee, and could they charge more for established artists?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, that level of subsidy is correct, and taken with the funding deed that Council also contributes is the quantum of Council's contribution to that. They actually do have a subtenant cafe that's a commercial agreement that is generating some income. So there is potential for changing the operating model, but I think, again, it's looking at the funding deed, the service agreement, the purpose and intention of the whole setup and how it could be done differently to either reduce the quantum of Council's contribution or how the site could generate some income to offset or value add to that.
Thanks, Ms McNeil. Can I just follow that up with just one question? So does that mean the cafe is on $104 a year? No. Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Councillor Brand, then Councillor Voss, I think.
I just want to follow up the question that was asked before because it is being discussed in public. I just want a clarification. The 600,000, whatever it was, nominal rental value for those areas that has been foregone by council to allow them to be artist studios. What is that calculated on? It's obviously not calculated on them being rented out as artist studios. What sort of potential use? What sort of potential use are they thinking of when they calculate a rent like that? I mean, it's a good idea to do it, but what are we looking at as the alternative to it from being artist studios at a rental of $600,000 per annum?
Through you, Mayor, when a market assessment is done, it takes into account the specific context of the site. So, for instance, with the St Kilda Botanical Gardens, when we did a market rent of a building on that site recently, it had to take into account the fact that it's a constrained use. So this site also took into account the context and the conditions, and that has resulted in the estimate. These estimates are useful for comparing across sites, and it is the only way that we can consistently look at valuing our spaces and the council's associated contribution to different community groups in discounting the rent either fully or in part.
Councillor Voss?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify, not for a moment did I think that the purpose was going to change from an arts-focused park, but having brought up that item, I'd just like to clarify item 5.5 when it talks about the terms of the tenancy agreement. It talks there of the terms of the tenancy agreement needs to be appropriate to the tenant and use of the premises and allows for consideration of alternative uses. Just wanted to get your understanding of what that might be. Are we looking at potentially other alternative uses that don't support the arts park focus?
Through you, Mayor, we're not looking at any uses that don't support the arts park. The purpose of the agreement is to deliver the funding agreement, which has a very specific outcome for the site that is in discussion.
Councillor Pearl, happy to move?
I'm happy to move.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond? Councillor Pearl? Yep. Councillor Bond?
Yes, having recently joined the Gasworks Arts Park Board, I do have in front of me a copy of our board papers for tomorrow night's board meeting. As part of their the funding deed from Council to Gasworks, they are required to report to Council 6 monthly their utilisation rates for the premises down there. They are currently reporting that from July to December 2018 it was 87% utilisation rate of all the facilities down there. That was the average across all of the different rooms and buildings, compared to, I'm told, an average of other Victorian arts premises of 61%, so it's certainly exceeding that. There's also a large number of the uses, local artists and local arts organisations. I think it's about, they're well exceeding 4 times their target. Their target was 25 and they've hit 103, so they're 4 times the target. That's in the first 6 months of this year. To Councillor Ross's point about the subsidy, there's a 600. If we were to extract, obviously maximum commercial rent on the site, it would be $650,000 on tonight's leases. Plus, there's another funding deed with them of about $580,000. So we're looking all up about a bit over 1.2 million, as he cringes in his chair there. Total subsidy from the City of Port Phillip to Gasworks Arts Park. Once these leases here tonight are signed with Gasworks.
Any further councillors wish to speak? Councillor Voss?
Thank you. I'm probably one of the biggest supporters of Gasworks. I think what they do there is fantastic, and I have to say over the last sort of 12 months there has been a step change in the delivery of programs. They've been much more outwardly focused, and what they're actually going to, their program that they're delivering for the next year is quite substantial, and I wanted to call that out and say, thank you, because they've come a long way in terms of the work that they've done in that organisation, from what I can see as a councillor. So their repertoire is quite incredible, and it's good to hear that they are looking at the funding deed and sort of acquitting against that. But I will welcome the future discussions on making those buildings, in particular the smaller artist studios, sculpture studios, the arts and crafts studios, much more used by many members of the artists community. I'm there a lot, and mostly I see the doors closed and the lights off. And when I see someone in there, it's usually one person. And I think that they could work so much harder for our artist community. We have so many of them wanting space. And I think with a bit of imagination, a bit of innovation, a bit of forward thinking, we can actually, do so much better in this particular area. All of our buildings now can no longer be single use, and that's it. You think of, life-saving clubs, for example. They have to work so much more harder. We've got a bigger population. This is an incredible space for our community. So And while it is one of the jewels in our crown, I think we just need to keep it that way and keep it working harder so it stays, you know, an incredible place for our artistic community, our parks, our dog walking community, all sorts of things. So I do think it can work harder, and I'll be looking to see that happen when we finish our policy on property and coming up to the funding deed.
Thanks, Councillor Voss. Councillor Pearl, do you wish to close?
Yes, thanks. Albeit this is a short-term lease, I'm happy to support it on that basis, and I think majority of councillors, by the looks of it, are also. But I think the toxic soil debate over the past few years has been a big distraction in terms of the actual future of the operation of this park, and I think we need to have a much closer look at the future of the park and the leases that are attached to the site. There are many community groups looking for homes in our community. The men's shed is expanding a great deal, and I wonder if there's any opportunities for Gasworks to work with that organisation in particular to increase the utilisation of these important assets. I would also note that Mr McCackey has stepped down as chair, and he always came to council meetings and was always here from the start to the end of the budget process. But I'll give them a pass on the fact that I don't think anyone from the organisation is here this evening. But I would expect next year when we're reconsidering this lease, well, you're a council delegate, Councillor Bond, so back in your chair, please, Councillor Bond. You were, but anyway, point of order, stop interjection. But I think we can do a lot better with this park. It's a huge subsidy, and I think with this council should go out to tender on the contract for these leases next year, and also the operation of the facilities. Gasworks has nothing to fear from that process, and it will improve the outcome to our community for that area and put competitive tension in the process to ensure that that organisation is 100% the right organisation to stay there. And if they're not, and we can find somewhere better, we should seriously consider it. But generally speaking, happy to approve this. It's not an interim lease, it's a lease. But we'll be considering something hopefully bigger next year attached to their funding deed. This is a massive investment of ratepayers, and I would hope at some point the organisation can become financially self-sufficient, and in the process we get a much better community park for generations to come.
Great speech. Thanks, Councillor Pearl. I'll move to the vote. All those in favour? That's unanimous. I declare it carried. Agenda item 15, notices of motion. There are none. 16, reports by councillor delegates. There are none. Oh, Councillor Voss.
I might ask your forgiveness, but I want to talk about the waterfront welcomers, given that it's the end of the cruise ship season. And they have welcomed and assisted over 9,000 passengers and crew from 45 cruise ships since the 2nd of October. The cruise ship season is ending next week, and so I think they've got about 3 more cruise ships to meet before that. So I think they've done amazing work, so I wanted to call that out. And I wanted to call out the 51 volunteer waterfront welcomers, and I know there's quite a lot more that are interested in joining. Just to say what a fantastic job they're doing on a voluntary basis for our community.
Well said. Can I ask a question? So there are probably 48 cruise ships this year, 45 plus 3. So how many cruise ships?
About 100.
100 cruise ships? And how does that compare? This is a bit irrelevant, but I'll ask it anyway. How does that compare with, say, 5 or 10 years ago?
10 years ago, there was about 15.
Wow. It's amazing, really. Remarkable growth, and they do a really fantastic job. Good contribution. Thanks very much for that, Councillor Voss. Councillor Simic? Just, you want to go home. Okay. Thanks very much for that. 17, urgent business. There is none. 18, confidential items. There are none. I now declare this meeting closed.